Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the NIDA CTN Initiatives and Primary Care Opioid Use Disorders Treatment Trial Briefing. All listeners are in a listen-only mode and lines will remain muted throughout the presentation. This call is also being recorded. I will now turn the call over to Dr. Marsh.
Great. Well, thanks very much. And hello, everyone. This is Lisa Marsh. I'm a professor in the medical school at Dartmouth College, and I have the privilege of chairing today's webinar. Thank you all for joining. I'd like to start by welcoming everyone to this, the first in a new series of discussions between the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment at SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and the National Drug Abuse Treatment Clinical Trials Network, the CTN at the National Institute on Drug Abuse. This webinar is largely intended to be informational, and the goal here really is to allow all of us to learn more about the goals and the initiatives, both within CSAT, the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment, as well as within the NIDA CTN. But we're really hoping that this is also an opportunity for us to brainstorm together about potential points of collaboration across these two organizations. So I think all of the folks on the call know that both CSAT and NIDA CTN really have an ultimate goal of tackling substance use disorders and the suffering that results from substance use disorders in our nation. And there are potentially points of intersection here, and if there are ways that we can accelerate the impact of this work by working together in new ways, that's really what we're seeking to achieve in some of these brainstorming discussions. So this is our initial meeting, and we have several others upcoming on different topics, including themes of adolescence and pregnant and parenting moms. And we're really hopeful that you all will be able to join this series of discussions, which will be happening roughly once per month. So today we have a wonderful lineup of speakers. We're going to start with Dr. Kim Johnson, who is the new director at CSAT as of February of 2016. And I think as you'll hear today, she has a terrific vision for the future of CSAT. And then Dr. Betty Tai, who's the founding leader of NIDA CTN, is going to provide an overview of the NIDA CTN initiatives. And then we have Dr. Kathy Bradley here from the Group Health Research Institute in Seattle. And Kathy is one of the principal investigators of the Health Systems Node in the NIDA CTN. And Kathy will talk today about a new implementation research initiative called the PROUD trial, which is focused on evaluating new models of care for opioid use disorders in primary care. And I think this trial will be of great interest to this audience. It underscores not only the value of implementation research methods with the goal of promoting adoption of science-based practices in systems of care, but it also is tackling this very significant and timely topic of opioid use disorders, which, as we all know, is impacting our entire nation. So after Kathy's presentation, we're going to have time for a group question and answer. We can ask questions of our speakers, and we can talk ideally with one another about potential points of collaboration. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and just very briefly introduce our first speaker, Dr. Kimberly Johnson, who, as I mentioned, started as the director of the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment at SAMHSA in February of this year. And prior to that, she was the Deputy Director for Operations of the CHEST Niatex Group, which is a research center at the University of Wisconsin in Madison that focuses on systems improvement in behavioral health and also developing mobile applications for patient self-management. She was also the co-director of the National Coordinating Office of the Addiction Technology Transfer Center. And before she was in Wisconsin, she served for 7 years as the director of the Office of Substance Abuse in Maine and had also previously served as the executive director of Crossroads for Women, which is a women's addiction treatment agency. So she's coming to this new role at CSAT with just a wealth of clinical experience as well as expertise in administrative leadership and systems evaluation and improvement. And Kim, we're really pleased to have the opportunity to hear from you today about your vision for CSAT. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So it's so nice to see so many of you here, and actually some names of people I've worked with in the past. It's great. Thank you so much for joining us. This whole issue of vision has been one that I've been struggling with. Actually, on my first day on the job, everyone wanted to know what my vision was, and I truly did not come here with a specific set of goals in mind. I really wanted to learn more about what had been being done at SAMHSA and where we were. And also, I come here at sort of an interesting time, right, where we have one administration that's in its last year, and we don't know what's going to happen next. And so anything that I launch, if I have some grand ideas, could very easily be completely turned around in the following year. And so I didn't want to do that to my staff or to the field. And so where I've kind of landed is basically on what CSAT's mission is and thinking about how we can do that better. And really, I probably should have had slides. I didn't do any slides for this. If you went on our webpage, you would see that really our job is to improve access to care for people with substance use disorders and to ensure the quality of care for people with substance use disorders. And so that really, in a nutshell, is my vision, is that we're going to do what we are supposed to do, what is our job. And so then it gets into the sort of the details of how do we do that. And so one of the things that that we are working on here now is, particularly in terms of access, although it will eventually lead into trying to do this with quality as well, is trying to make better use of the data that we have to drive our programming decisions. So we're doing a lot of work with CBISC, and I don't know, I probably most of you know who CBISC is, but CBISC is another center here at SAMHSA, the Center for Behavioral Health, Statistics, and Quality, to do things like do geographic maps of treatment need versus availability of services. So we're developing that as a resource for ourselves and for the field, and also looking at specific needs by population, and even by drug of choice. What is available and what is necessary for someone who is an alcohol use disorder only versus someone who is polysubstance use or who has an opioid use disorder is going to be different. And so trying to think about our programming and how we design our programs within the constraints that we have, which is, Congress tells us what to do, and we have constraints around that. So that's one piece that we're doing. But the other piece is so we want to drive our decisions around access using our data, but the other piece of that is, so what is it people need access to, right? What is the best, what do we know about what services or what medications work best for whom? And so that is really where I start having conversations with NIDA, really at two levels. And one is at this, help in where this series of discussions is beginning is, I think we need to have this two-way dialogue around what are you guys all finding, and so that we know what the latest research is, and also what are we hearing from the field about what the needs are, so that we can have this dialogue around where the field informs what happens in research, and research informs what happens in the field, and to get this two-way communication going. And some of this thinking for me came out of the Institute of Medicine report on psychosocial interventions. And so if anyone hasn't seen that or read that, I recommend it. I've recommended it to my staff to review, and I would recommend it to anyone because it for me anyway, it's really sort of informing my thinking about what is it we need to do, both on the research side in terms of how we ask questions, which questions we ask, and also on the implementation side in terms of how we use the research and how we translate the research so that it's usable for people in the field. So this is the first in a series of meetings that I hope we can continue to have even after the first three. So I hope this discussion that we engage in really helps us think about what we need to do going forward I'm very excited about the possibility and the opportunity to more closely align what we're doing with NIDA in general, with the CTN specific. So that's it for me, and I'll turn it back to you so you can have Betty speak.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Kim. So our next speaker is Dr. Betty Pye, and she has been the founding leader of NIDA's first and largest clinical trials network and has had that role for the past 16 years. Betty's background is in clinical psychopharmacology, and she, as many of you on the call know, folks who are affiliated with CTN, she leads this national research infrastructure, which is a network of academic institutions in partnership with a very wide range of medical settings, drug treatment programs to bridge the gap between research and practice by promoting the translation of research into patient care and practices that are science-based. And I think many, again, on the call are well aware about the recognition that the CTN has had nationally and internationally for its terrific contributions to improving drug abuse treatment. So thanks, Betty.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for taking the lead, and thank you for your wonderful ideas of us reach out to CSAT, and also that Kim Johnson are so graciously participating in all these activities with us. So I will just give a very brief summary of what the CTN is and the mission and the ment and what we've done in the past so many years. So how do I advance the slide? Thank you for letting me know. Next slide, please. Can anybody hear? Okay, thank you. All right. I started to worry about nobody can hear me. All right, so our mission is really to improve drug abuse treatment throughout the nation using science as a vehicle. Next slide. As Lisa said, it's in existence for many years, and now is the fourth cycle of our funding since 15 to 20. You know, when a program lasts for many years, you can see that we also have to grow with the involvement of the field and you know what's coming. Okay, I just learned how to advance this. So earlier, as you can see in the last cycle, we have 13 nodes that where it's located. As you can see, mostly on East and West Coast, a few in the middle of the country, but that doesn't mean most addicts were on both sides or the patients are centralized in big cities. But you know, when we do this kind of program, that's probably ended up with, I have witnessed the other networks, even very well funded, is about the similar kind of thing. So I just want to go forward. And in this round of funding, our research priority has been on three major areas. One is to evaluate, model, identify, addressing substance use disorder, particularly OUD, opioid use disorder, in general medical settings. As you can see, in the past, the first 2-3 cycles, what we did was in the community treatment programs, and largely funded by SAMHSA block grants. But now, because of the Affordable Care Act since 2010, we have to started moving into the general medical settings, and which definitely is a challenge, and many things need to be worked out. Also, in the same time, with the ACA, or maybe a little precede that, is the big push for application of health information technology innovatives. So the SUD field is, alongside with many other therapeutic areas, we must move into that area so that we can be, you know, getting on the same platform. And the third thing is that because our node is funded or our grant is funded with quite a substantial amount of HIV dollars. So we also evaluate strategies to reduce transmission of HIV, HCV, not only because of the funding, but also because injecting drug use is the major vector for HIV transmission. So our working model has slightly changed or expanded in this cycle. As you can see, CTN wants to serve as a bridge between research and patient care. In other words, between investigators and the specialty care treatment programs. But because of the ACA, and we're now trying to incorporate additional partners in this effort, which are the general medical settings. As you know that there are investigators doing more research in this area. We have included them in our notes, and we also trying to reach out to general medical settings so we can start making all of these partners to work together. And there are various models to do this. So what are the key CTN tasks? Because we are a clinical trials network, what we think is that we were using clinical trials, mostly large multi-site clinical trials, to address research questions that can impact care. And when we do the clinical trials, we pay special attention to how to implement it and how to generate high-quality data. And that data ended up in research results, but that's not the end of it. We also want to see those research results being used. Okay, so now we talk about what type of clinical trials we're conducting. We are actually conducting a wide spectrum. The ultimate goal is to do implementation trials, but not all the questions or issues are ready for that kind of trials. So we move back a little bit. There are effectiveness trials and even efficacy trials, and sometimes we got bright ideas that we need to do the very early on pilot testing before we can move into efficacy trial and effectiveness trial. And thank God our nodes are so resourceful. Many of them has capability doing all the spectrum of research, although we'd like to see the earlier study being conducted with R01 kind of grants and the smaller scaled study being done in that way. And once they move into CTN, we wanted to do it all the way to the right as large multi-site trials that can generalize the findings. This is a diagram to show our achievement. On the far right are all those trials with only number, which doesn't mean much to many of you who are not familiar with our program, but we do have supplement and also our website to guide you what have been done. As you can see, all of the studies being completed and published, and some of the results. When we say dissemination, we're saying that it's being out there. And then 3 studies currently are under the domain of data analysis, and the 2 are data collection, and a bunch of them are pending development and review in various phases of protocol development. As you can see, in all these trials include a variety of different kind of interventions, or even some are not intervention kind of studies like pharmacotherapy, behavior therapy, integrated cell therapy, health service studies, surveys, prevention, health disparity, data science. But as you can see, some of the studies are not necessarily the primary trial. They can be ancillary to the ongoing study to gain additional information knowledge from the big trial to make the investment even worth more. here is the status of upcoming trial timeline. In 2016 is, as you can see, there are a few trials in different stage. The green is the randomization ongoing project, and the red bar is in preparation for implementation. So in 2016, 2017, as you can see, can be very busy, and continuously new ideas and new concepts are being developed. That's going to advance into 2018 and 2019. This is a very tricky business because all of these things were dictated and driven by budget. And the CTN budget, I can tell you, is very complicated. And a lot of times we delay studies or advance studies based on how we can best fit the budget to do the most. And thanks to my colleague Ron Dobbins, who's an expert in this area, so that we can maximize our investment. After the study being done, as you can see, we had a traditional collaboration with SAMHSA in the past, which is the NIDA SAMHSA blending initiative. It started from day one. We worked closely with the ATTC to use some of the CTN research results and develop that into blending packages. As you can see, the blending products are many, and they are free to be requested and sent out. Many of them are very welcomed, and they are now online. But lately, we have been thinking of developing products that can fit into the medical settings. The first step we took was going into a lot of the medical conferences and to have a booth there and to hopefully to engage interested party from the different kind of professional societies and have conferences, hopefully to have symposium there to gradually disseminate the words of our existence and our doing and getting other people to participate. I tell you that we started this for the past 4 or 5 years. Initially it was very challenging. Now we are making inroads, and some of the society has contacted us. The other thing we're doing is to work with NIDA's Office of Science Policy program to start it, develop or help them to develop educational materials for various providers. We have a dissemination library. This is a very good resource. I can't tell you enough about how useful it is. It's being implemented through the Washington University in Washington State. It is a library that's very user-friendly. All the CTN material, including its research and product meeting notice, dissemination product, you name it, it's all listed there, and the librarians are very knowledgeable, and please feel free. Everything on the website is free. And we also have a data share. This is all the studies that we have conducted. The database is being put on the web for various people to share. You can download and do study analysis with it. And on this data share, not just the study data, but also the study protocol, the data set, the case report forms, data dictionary, you name it. Even with this, I still often receive inquiries about people who download this need additional information. I always refer them to the principal investigators who conducted the study, because a lot of times you do need more insightful information. And they are all being very helpful. And this is a good resources for people doing secondary analysis or for trainees like pre-doc students or post-doc students. And that's a very brief recap, and I thank you for your attention to this. That's from me. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Great. Thank you so much, Betty. Since this is our first webinar in the series between CSAT and CTN, we wanted to start off with an overview of the mission of these two groups as described by the leaders of these groups, from Dr. Johnson at CSAT and Dr. Tai at CTN. But another goal of these discussions is to highlight research, and as Kim said earlier, to generate a two-way dialogue about research. And so today we want to highlight one area of research, namely implementation research that's being conducted within a current trial within the CTN, focused on treatment of opioid use disorders in primary care. And here to give an overview of that project is Dr. Catherine Bradley, who is a general internist and health services researcher. She's conducted research on how care for substance use disorders can be practically integrated into medical settings. She's a senior investigator at Group Health Research Institute. She's an affiliate professor of medicine and health services at the University of Washington. She's also an associate investigator at Veteran Affairs, Puget Sound Healthcare System. And her ongoing research includes NIAAA-funded work focused on nurse-delivered collaborative care for alcohol use disorders, AHRQ-funded pragmatic trials of implementation of screening, brief intervention, shared decision-making for unhealthy alcohol use and alcohol use disorders that's being conducted across 25 primary care clinics. And she currently has a mid-career mentoring award. And as I mentioned earlier, she's one of 3 PIs on the new health systems node, which is a node that joined the NIDA Clinical Trials Network in the fall of 2015. So thanks so much, Kathy.
Thank you for that nice introduction, and thank you, Drs. Marsh, Tai, and Johnson for inviting me to speak today at this first conference collaboratively between CSAT and NIDA. I'm excited about this dialogue that's being set up. I think it's going to really further both improving care and improving research so that we can improve care. So my task this morning is to give an overview of what we call the PROUD trial, and the goal of the trial is increasing access to high-quality medication treatment for opioid use disorders, OUD, in primary care. I'd like to start with acknowledging that I am the ringleader, if you will, but this is a study that is being launched by a huge number of people. This slide has the protocol development group, the original protocol development group that started meeting back in April, and also the intervention development group. I want to also call out people who are not on this slide. So we have an operations core and have really benefited from the expertise of the CTN and the MS Clinical Coordinating Center and the Data Statistics Center. So David Liu, Ron Dobbins, and Carol Cushing, as well as Betty Tai in NIDA, and then Jennifer McCormick, Eve Kjellstrom, Matt Wright, Abby Matthews, and John Rush from MS. And so this is truly a trial launched by a village. I'd like to also on this slide acknowledge Andy Saxon, who's from kind of my sister node here, if you will, in Seattle, and a co-lead with me of this. I am not an expert on opioid use disorder, but Andy is, and really appreciate his support and teaching me about the CTN. And then Denise Boudreau is a pharmacoepidemiologist who's also a co-lead and really leading the data analytics core. And finally, Jeffrey Samet, who invented the model in his shop along with a lot of investigators there, is leading the intervention development core, of which we are really appreciative. Cynthia Campbell is also in our leadership group, as well as Jennifer Bobb and Gwen Lapham. And then 2 people really important that are left off this slide are our project managers here, Jana Now and Megan Addis. So I say that because sometimes people think it's very simple to do research where we're going to be using secondary data from health systems, but it actually takes a huge number of people to launch these, and I am just the speaker for the group. So I'm going to cover 3 areas this morning: the background for the trial, the design, high-level overview of the PROUD trial, and then I'll tell you about phase 1, which is what we're doing from now to June 1st of next year. So I don't need to tell it. People who called in, I'm sure all know we are in the midst of an opioid epidemic, and there is an incredible need to increase not just treatment for opiate use disorders, but effective treatment for opiate use disorders. And as you all know, we have 3 medications that are effective for opiate use disorders, probably methadone most effective for people who can access it, buprenorphine next, and then injectable naltrexone. And we know that if we can engage people in medication treatment for 12 months, we actually improve their health outcomes. And that's really, I think, what is great about this study, and also what we're going to be able to do as we improve care in this area. But we have huge gaps in treatment. 85% of people with opiate use disorders get no treatment. Those who do get treatment, even with medication treatment, 15% get medication treatment, but only 21% in one state were still on, and these are Medicaid patients, were still on medications for opiate use disorders 12 months later. And we know that that persistent treatment matters. So that we can figure out, kind of just back of the envelope, maybe 3% of people with opiate use disorders are getting persistent treatment, which is effective treatment. So high-quality opiate use treatment will do these things, we would posit. One is that it's going to attract people into health systems to get treatment. We know that patients with opiate use disorders feel stigma. They feel shame, they feel fear, and we need to create systems that make them come into care and seek treatment. We need treatment with medications. It needs to be patient-centered, and we need to be able to keep patients on medications for 12 months, as I manage, because that's ultimately going to improve patients' health outcomes. The barriers, probably everybody on this call knows these barriers more than I do, but obviously, stigma is huge. It causes fear, avoidance of the healthcare system, and then there are barriers to prescribing due to its timing, complexity, as well as probably stigma. And then I think that although the FQHCs, federally qualified health centers, and the Medicaid programs across the states have really recognized a need to step up to the plate and improve systems of care for opiate use disorders, I think many large health systems believe that treatment is adequate because nobody's banging down their door for more. If they had an inadequacy of hip replacements, people will come bang on their door. But nobody's banging on their door saying we need more treatment for opiate use disorders because of the stigma, I would posit. Efforts to date have been to educate people, which is important and critical first step to increase the number of physicians who are waivered. But there's this challenge that many people get waivered and then don't prescribe. And then implementation strategies for primary care. There have been 11 other models, aside from the one we're going to discuss this morning, so 12 models that were beautifully outlined in an AHRQ systematic review, the draft of which came out last spring. And all of these models essentially have a care coordinator in them, what they call the glue person in some models, somebody to help get all the work done that is not the prescribing and the diagnosis. But we picked one model, which is a collaborative care model, which we will refer to as the Massachusetts model, because it had the best evidence for it, and it had the best evidence that it resulted in sustained treatment, which is really, I think, the holy grail. What we want to really aim at is persistent treatment. So the Massachusetts model is a nurse-based collaborative care model. And the components are a nurse manager who can manage up to 100 patients alone. If you add a medical assistant, an MA, to the mix, she can go, or he can go, up to 125 patients. And the nurse really does everything but prescribe, diagnose, and then manage complications or side effects that medications need to be changed. And so that's a huge amount of the work of prescribing in primary care. And I should say the Massachusetts model is a program that focused initially, I think, just on buprenorphine in primary care, although referring patients who needed to methadone maintenance was part of the model, and now it's being broadened to other addictions, medications as well, is my understanding. So the physicians in the clinic then, and usually there are at least 2, I think we might be going to require 3, diagnose and prescribe buprenorphine, but work closely with the nurse as a team. And the other piece of the model is that there's technical assistance from outside the health system, and that involves training the nurse and actually taking the nurse to work with a nurse that already delivers this model, currently mostly in Massachusetts, and then ongoing technical assistance as the nurse needs. And then finally, there's public reporting, which helps clinics see how they're doing. The goal is for the nurse to engage 2 new patients in induction on buprenorphine each week. And so that is monitored and feedback is provided for all sites involved. The effects today, so this model was developed by in the Division of General Medicine at Boston University, and then it's been spread across Massachusetts into, I believe, 21 clinics, and there's more spread going on right now. And what's really impressive about this model, and one of the things that's kind of an outsider to this narrow field of treating opiate use disorders in primary care initially, was that this model pulls people into the clinic that weren't there before. So 70 to 93% of patients are new who come to get buprenorphine, come and seek the care after the program starts. So it's what I refer to as a build it and they will come. And the other reason I mentioned already that we selected this model to evaluate is that it's got the most evidence for it, and specifically high levels of persistence. 50 to 67% of patients are engaged at 12 months, which is truly impressive. Now, most of the work on this model and the financing has been through federally qualified health care systems and state funding for uninsured or Medicaid patients. But 53% of people with opiate use disorders have private insurance. So we are thinking that there is a need for this model in large health systems, and that it needs to be tested in large health systems to show the benefits of it. So part 2, I'm going to tell you at a high level the PROUD trial, where we are evaluating the Massachusetts model in large health systems. This PROUD trial is a cluster randomized pragmatic comparative effectiveness trial. Try to say that a million times. And it's comparing the Massachusetts model to usual primary care. We're comparing to usual primary care because that's what's out there. We know that primary care will change during this trial, that there will be all kinds of efforts to improve care for opiate use disorders, but we want to compare this model to the prevailing model that is in these health systems. So the research question, the primary researcher's question is, does the Massachusetts model, when compared to usual primary care, increase the number of days of medication treatment for opiate use disorders per 10,000 patients, at least 2-fold? So we're looking for, at a minimum, a 2-fold increase in the patient days of treatment per 10,000 patients. Secondary aims are, and sorry, the slide is a little scrambled up, does the Massachusetts model, when compared to usual care, increase the proportion of primary care patients who are diagnosed with opiate use disorders, receive medications for opiate use disorders, and receive high-quality opiate use disorder treatment, which is defined as persistent treatment at 12 months. I should say that when we're talking about treatment here, we're talking about any medication treatment for opiate use disorders, but we're expecting most of it will be buprenorphine. This is essentially, these outcomes are essentially the treatment cascade that you see often for HIV or drug abuse. And then the other secondary aim is, does the Massachusetts model, when compared to usual primary care, decrease the proportion of patients with opiate use disorders who use acute care services in the following year? And acute care services include urgent care, emergency department care, and hospital care. We're specifically looking at this because we think these services are very expensive to health systems to provide, and we think one of the reasons they're going to choose to pay up front for a nurse is going to be to improve quality, we hope, but maybe if that doesn't get them interested, maybe the cost benefits will, and that's why we're looking at utilization. The design of the trial is what's called a hybrid type 2 effectiveness implementation trial, and really what that means is it's halfway between an effectiveness trial where we're trying to see does a treatment work in a generalizable population to an implementation trial where we're really just asking, can we implement something? And this trial is asking both sets of questions. It's, as I mentioned, a pragmatic cluster randomized trial, and the clinic is the unit of randomization. And the setting is large health systems. So by a large health system, I mean like our large health system has 25 primary care clinics. It's a regional insurer. Kaiser, Northern California, I think has 450 clinics. I made that up. I'm not actually sure that's the right number, but many, many clinics. The Kaisers and Southern California, Kaiser likewise. And so these are large systems, but we will be testing. We will be evaluating many of the clinics in phase 1, but we will be selecting 2 clinics from each of the health systems. And then all data for this study comes from the electronic health record, including the sample identification for the study, the diagnoses, the medications. We'll be using claims data as well as EHR data to get pharmacy data, ICD codes, which are the electronic diagnostic codes, and utilization data. And then we will be getting death data, although it's quite lagged and will not be come through in time for the main trial results. This I repeated and I said, but at the bottom of this slide, the second bullet, an important part of this work is that it will be done with waivers of both informed consent and a HIPAA waiver. And the reason that will be possible is that the health systems are going to be implementing the care. We are only going to be evaluating the care. So I'll show you that on the next slide. And the other question people often have is, what about 42 CFR? 42 CFR applies to treatment programs, and systems do differentiate what they call treatment programs, but these data that we will be using are de-identified data based on 42 CFR definitions. So whereas HIPAA refers to dates and zip codes as identifiers, 42 CFR does not, and so the data we will be getting are completely de-identified from a 42 CFR point of view. We will be implementing the trial in 6 healthcare systems. We anticipate we'll be doing final power analyses with the data from phase 1. I'll tell you about in a minute. Each system will contribute 2 large clinics that we expect to include at least 10,000 patients each. In some health systems, if they're rural, it might be a cluster of clinics rather than a single clinic that would be randomized as if it was a clinic. And stratification, the randomization will be stratified, meaning it will be within each health system. 1 clinic or cluster will get the intervention, and 1 will get the control or be left totally alone, I should say, so that it's clear. So this is a diagram that basically shows the same thing, 6 health systems, 2 clinics each, 2 primary care clinics each. And we anticipate, so therefore we'll have over 60,000 patients in each arm. And even if the prevalence of opiate use disorders is on the low side, these numbers come from 0.9% prevalence, we expect 540 patients with opiate use disorders in each arm. Now, these are not necessarily diagnosed patients, but they are the underlying prevalence that we expect to be there. So the nurse care manager in this trial will be implemented by the health system. And the way that will work is NIDA will fund the nurse and fund the nurse for 2.5 years. So 6 months to hire the nurse. The health system will hire the nurse, but the funding will be given by NIDA. And then 2 years to follow all sites. So 6 months after randomization, we will start collecting data from all sites. The study will also provide technical assistance for the nurse. The primary sample we anticipate will be all patients who visit the primary care clinics in the 6 to 18 months after randomization. This sample will be evaluated with a primary outcome I alluded to earlier, the number of days of opiate use disorder medication treatment per 10,000 patients. And then we have a number of secondary outcomes: opiate use disorders diagnosis, opiate use disorders treatment, persistent treatment at 12 months, and acute care, as I alluded to earlier. So the timeline, the way the timeline for this looks is The trial starts at randomization, and we expect that to be at about June 1st if all goes well. And we first will look back and gather covariates on all patients who were seen before the clinic, before the randomization. And then we will measure outcomes with the electronic health record data, EHR data, and claims data starting 6 months after the nurses, after randomization. And that gives, we anticipate that it's going to take sites somewhere between 3 and 6 months to hire the nurse and have her trained up by the technical assistants. We will then follow and collect outcomes for 2 years after that. And this slide was really made to show how we would do the secondary outcome of persistent treatment, where we will identify patients who come into the clinic from 6 months after randomization to 18 months, that 12-month start of opiate use disorders, and we'll follow each of them for 12 months to find out what proportion are persistently on treatment for 12 months. So the innovations of this study are that it's a pragmatic implementation trial, which are done more and more these days, but a little trickier when you start addressing addictions. The sample will be very generalizable to the world of healthcare. We have diverse health systems, I'll show you in a minute, and all data come from the electronic health record. The primary outcome is an outcome that we designed to be sensitive, but also to reflect both access and quality. So it's going to reflect, it's a composite of the number of patients treated and the persistence of treatment in days of treatment. And then the secondary outcomes I already reviewed for you. And the study is also innovative because it's evaluating opiate use disorder in insured populations, which has generally been a neglected population for this sort of research. We are talking with colleagues in the CTN about a couple secondary grants at this point. One would be a qualitative study, really high quality, qualitative study of barriers and facilitators that Amy Campbell and then Nunes in New York are interested in doing, and we met with them at AHSR last week, Jeffrey and I and Gwen, and then we are going to be talking very soon with Bruce Shackman in the Cherish Center, which is a NIDA cost center, about the possibility of a grant to evaluate cost effectiveness outcomes. The reason I should just say that the putting a nurse in the 6 health systems for 2.5 years is very expensive, and that's really what bars us from integrating some of this really important work right into the main trial. So part 3 is just to tell you a little bit about NIDA has been incredibly gracious to fund a phase 1 for this work, which I think will really allow us to be successful in the trial. So it's really a 9-month period of preparing for the trial, and I'll kind of walk you through what we've been doing. The goals, first of all, are to demonstrate the ability to extract data on the sample outcomes and covariates, to obtain data for rigorous statistical power simulations, and to select the clinics based on both quantitative and qualitative data. We will also learn a lot about the barriers and facilitators of implementation in the health systems, and we will identify and engage, we hope, the leaderships of 6 willing health systems. So these are the 11 health systems that have competed by giving us all kinds of data to get into phase 1. I'll just read them off. Group Health, Harris Health System is down in Texas. Health Partners is up in Minnesota. Henry Ford is in Michigan. Kaiser Colorado, Kaiser Northern California, Kaiser Northwest, and Kaiser Southern California. Kind of tell you where they are. Montefiore is in New York. The Multi-Care Health System is an insurance plan in this region, the Pacific Northwest, and the University of Miami Health System is centered around Miami. So the work of phase 1, we anticipate that this, not only will we prepare for the PROUD trial, but we will also learn a huge amount about opiate use disorders treatment across these systems, and we've recruited a number of early career investigators to help us write papers on that. But initially in the summer, we developed the protocol We selected the 11 healthcare systems in September. We completed all the IRB needs for group health, and because this is a data-only study, all the other sites we are expecting and hoping will be able to seed to the group health IRB. We drafted a data sharing agreement which will allow data not only to come here, but then de-identified data to go to the NIDA Data and Statistics Center who are partnering with us on this, and we developed the early phases of data specifications. This fall, we're doing the subcontracts with 11 sites. We're going to be working on the data extraction and programming to pull from our site and testing it at another site. And then we will also start in the month of November having every other week calls with the programmers to start preparing them so that when we have all the IRB and data use agreements in place by January 1st, they will be able to extract the data from their health systems. Some health systems are part of what's called the Healthcare Research Network, and they will able to be actually just to adapt our code and run it on what's called the virtual data warehouse, but 4 systems will be having to write their own code based on our specifications. At that same time, while the programmers are working on getting the data, there will be every other week calls for the site PIs, the site principal investigators, and the project managers, the PMs, and they will be led through a process of identifying key stakeholders in their health system, scheduling interviews, and conducting a kind of a key informant interview really on the current state of addictions care in their health system. This is not research. This is really building a current state, kind of an environmental scan, and then also engaging leaders and hoping to interest them so that they will be supportive of conducting this trial in their health system. In the winter, the data collection will happen, the interviews will happen. We hope to end up with letters of some support from at least 6 health systems, and we will select sites in March. And then in spring, if all goes well and it's feasible and NIDA decides to fund the full trial, we will engage the health systems. We will select them, as I said, and do the IRB and data use agreements and subcontracts so that we can launch the randomized trial. The randomization would go right around June 1st or early summer. So that's kind of the high-level overview. We think this is an innovative, pragmatic trial. It's going to be a very challenging trial, but we're very excited that NIDA is willing to do this because we think it could be a real game changer in terms of the information we'll get both from phase 1 and from the trial itself. We're evaluating what we think looks to be the most successful model at really resulting in long-term care, and it's going to have a very rapid launch. Essentially, we started designing this trial in April of this year. It was launched by September, and the randomization will happen by next June, we hope. So with that, I'm finished. I want to thank you all for calling in, and I'm more than happy to take questions and discuss and comments as well from everybody who's joined. Thanks so much.
At this time, participant lines will be opened and unmuted. To help decrease background noise, please be sure your computer speakers are muted and to self-mute using the mute feature on your telephone when you are not speaking.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Kathy, for that great presentation about this project. We want to now shift to really having a conversation with the group that's joining today. And so there may be questions not only for the speakers, perhaps questions to Kim about SAMHSA or questions about the CTN. Dr. Tai had a conflict, unfortunately, with another meeting that starts now, but there are many other colleagues from CTN on the call that may be able to field questions about CTN. Or questions for Kathy about implementation research and or this particular trial that she's talked about. But I think what we also want to do now for folks who can stay on for the next half an hour or so is to really brainstorm about ideas together, right? So how can we, as Kim pointed out, achieve this goal of facilitating a two-way dialogue around the latest research? You know, SAMHSA seeking to improve access to care, quality of care, and as the NIDA CTN is seeking to translate science to practice, what are the opportunities for collaboration across these two groups and for some of the methods to get us there? You know, I think this is a unprecedented time in our country. The whole country is talking. There's this national dialogue about addiction in a way that, you know, I'm not sure we've seen before, and this has been largely generated by the opioid crisis, and also I think another topic that we're all talking about as a country is changing cannabis laws. But I think it's a really, it's a moment, it's a tremendous opportunity, it feels like to me, to think about how these two organizations that are leaders in this space, SAMHSA and the NIDA CTN, could have some coordinated efforts to really respond to this dialogue. I mean, I really think we have an opportunity. We see a multitude of initiatives popping up at, you know, community levels, at state levels, at federal levels to try to tackle this issue. And, you know, I know that SAMHSA and CSAT and NIDA CTN are different organizations. They have different mandates. But I think, you know, there are many overlapping goals, and in the end, this is about tackling substance use and its impact and access to effective resources nationally. So this is a chance to put our heads together. It's great to see how many people are on this webinar from both SAMHSA and CTN. And I think this is a chance to put our heads together to think about how can we accelerate the scope and the impact of the work that we're all doing. So please, let's brainstorm with your ideas and questions, and let's have a dialogue now. So the lines are open, and please feel free to jump in.
There's one question that has come up on the screen. I don't know if can everybody see the Q&A box? Otherwise, I can just read them.
Kathy, perhaps you should read it.
Okay. Somebody asked, will the PROUD trial be able to track out-of-network treatment? Great question. Clearly somebody in the know about this type of research. So, confession, I simplified the story when I presented it to you in terms of I talked about the sample would be based on visits. And the reason I presented that sample to you is it's one that we will get across all of our health systems. But some of our health systems are actually health insurance plans where they will have coverage of everybody. And that's what this guest is asking about. Out-of-network care means if I am group health and a patient gets care outside of group health, will we capture that? So we will for some of the health systems. And one of the things we'll be finding out is how many of the systems can get us that out-of-network care and have total claims. And so so essentially that's a secondary sample, and it may be that we conduct the trial such that, let's say we have mostly systems that are health plans, we would include the population would then be the enrolled population in those health systems, but let's say we have another health system, let's just say Montefiore, and let's say they didn't have claims, then that health system would be just a visit-based sample. So we may actually change the sample across the health systems, and that's partly why it's important that we're going to be stratifying within the health system. Hope that gets at your question. But yes, we will. We are trying to, and that's what we're assessing phase one, one of the important parts of assessing the data, phase one.
Lisa, this is Kim. So I have a thought based on this presentation, and it's really a question, I guess. But so obviously we need the outcomes of this study now, right?
Yeah.
And the outcomes won't come for 5 or 6 years, right? And so so the thing I think about is is there a way to communicate interim results, and what are the risks of that, and how do we, and I think the question is around this study, but I think it actually gets to a larger question of, the cycle is a long cycle, even though you have a very rapid cycle in terms of getting from proposal to implementation of this study, which, that's incredibly fast, but still in terms of, I have $22 million out to states now. If Congress does what they keep saying they're going to do, we'll probably have more money that goes out to states to increase access to medication. And they're looking at models. ARC has the document that I think is either in clearance or still out for public comment that lists 12 different models. But there's really, I would say they're all variations on maybe one of three. One is this one, the Massachusetts model. One is the Vermont model, the hub and spoke model, and one is sort of the like the echo telecommunications model, and the others are kind of variations of that. And so people are implementing without having a good sense of what to do. So what can we do together? How can we work together to get results out, even if they're interim results or something out to the field more rapidly? Because if we wait till this study is over, my guess is we'll be already on the backside of the opioid use epidemic and we'll be into something else.
So Kim, this is Lisa. I'll just make a quick comment, and then I'm sure others on the call have lots to say about this, including perhaps someone from the CTN can talk a little bit about process of data collection and analysis. But one thought, I think your point is great and very important, and this trial is being conducted at at the fastest pace that it can be. But I'm wondering also, in addition to thinking about this one study, if there are opportunities as people are implementing and there are resources going to states and people are expanding treatment capacity, if there are opportunities to embed evaluations in new ways within those initiatives, right? So to embed some questions and metrics around impact and maybe even some quasi-experimental kinds of designs in those initiatives people are doing anyway, and have this opportunity for sort of national learning. Maybe there is even some common measures we think about promoting across this national rollout, and having a whole new level of research with what's happening with the funding and the initiatives within the states. But I'd love to hear what other people think on the call. We have a lot of great minds on this call, so it would be great to hear from folks.
This is Kathy. Let me just say a brief word before we open it up. The trial will only take, it's 2.5 years and then 6 months to analyze, so it'll be 3 years. And I totally get that seems far away. I think it's going to provide a really unique type of evidence, and one opportunity, I think, will be that if these health systems that we're evaluating in phase 1 have many clinics that could participate, there is the opportunity for the state to fund hub and spoke model in a couple other clinics, and a echo type model in other clinics, where we could do a comparative effectiveness study across. The point I'm trying to make is that pulling the data out of these particular systems, it doesn't cost a lot more in the integrated systems to grab more clinics. So that's one of the things we'll be looking at in phase 1, is if there's a lot of innovation going in a health system, we might choose to pull the data on the clinics that are doing other innovations. And that would be kind of low-hanging fruit. I think I'd like to turn it over to the DSC. I don't see a problem with intermediary results where we were to say, what's the number of patients that got initiated, and we had that as an interim pre-planned outcome that was going to get reported after 1 year. But I know the CTN has a lot of protocols around these things, so I think that would be a change for them, but I think it's an interesting idea, Kim. Anybody from the DSC, the Data Statistics Center, or the Clinical Coordinating Center, or the NIDA CTN?
Well, this is Jeffrey Salmon in Boston, so I'm not from any of those, but I'm involved with PROUD a bit, as Kathy mentioned. I would step back and give perspective. Look, OBOT, office-based opioid treatment with buprenorphine, has been around for 14 years, and there's still places that don't do it at all, and there are places that have created new models. The 3 that you mentioned are 3 prominent ones, and I would just say, we're incrementally adding to the database. There's stuff out there. People want to do it. There's stuff to jump with. This will inform us in about as quick and reasonable and scientific a process forward. So I wouldn't be as disturbed as the initial comment was. I think this is progress moving forward, and the epidemic won't go away before we know more.
If it did, it would be a good thing.
It would be. Yeah, and I don't want you to hear from my question or my comment that I mean this is really rapid, right? I mean, I have been a researcher. I know how fast this is. But I also, I think this is sort of the issue that is a constant issue for us and for the industry in general is that practice frequently precedes the research. And when something's in practice, it's actually hard to extract, right? When someone's doing something, it's very hard to get them to change what they're doing. And so thinking about how we can inform practice as people are adopting it, you know, that's just, and I think it goes both ways, right? It's like, so how can we learn from this research as you're doing it? But then I think Lisa's point is a really important one, is as we're implementing, how can we make sure that we're studying what we're doing on the implementation side?
And this is Lisa. I wonder if, to facilitate that, if there might be some value in thinking about the methods for that, like maybe there are some opportunities to incentivize collaboration between SAMHSA grantees, you know, healthcare systems or states that are engaged in this, and linking them to some of the expertise within the national CTN research infrastructure. You know, it would be great to hear thoughts about ways to actually create a methodology, a framework to facilitate that.
Are we still on?
Yeah, we are still on, and Abigail Matthews, who's our PhD biostatistician in the Data Statistics and Coordinating Center, or Data and Statistics Center at MS. Her microphone isn't working, so she sent this comment I'll read. As you noted, NIDA CTN has policies about interim release of data. However, these policies derive from usual RCTs, or randomized controlled trials. It is possible that the NIDA CTN would consider modifications given the pressing OUD epidemic. Thanks for that, Abby. Appreciate those thoughts. So it sounds like a conversation could begin about what are the best ways to serve the public and the healthcare industry in meeting this crisis with the possibility of interim data. Thanks. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, Lisa, this is John Rosen, and hi, Kathy, hi, Lisa, hi, Jeff, and everybody else. Given the build it and they will come expectation, which is going to enrich the percentage of opioid-dependent patients or opioid use disorder patients in the experimental arm, how are the two arms going to be balanced? I haven't thought about that much until you presented it a few minutes ago. But I'm just wondering, and maybe it's a moot question, but could you comment on that, Kathy?
Yeah, it is not a moot question. It's a very good question. And we've had a bit of a journey in this regard. The way they're balanced is that they were randomly assigned, so apparently appearing equivalent clinics at the start, and then we will be measuring days of treatment per 10,000 patients. We have to somehow adapt for the size of the clinics. We ended up at this outcome because with the most conservative estimates that we had, we couldn't be sure we were going to be powered for the original design. And the original design was to study people who had been assigned to only use paneled health systems, health insurance plans, to include the entire paneled population in the denominator, and then to look at persistent, the proportion of patients on persistent treatment as the outcome. So we moved that to a secondary outcome. We will do power analyses when we get the data from phase 1, and we may be able to move back to a more rigorous design where the sample is defined before randomization. So it makes us an even more of a hybrid towards implementation and more of a quasi-experimental design, because we don't actually have a defined population from before. We have an implicit population, if you will. I hope that answers your question, but essentially the most rigorous design did not look powered. We had hoped to have 10 sites. We didn't have enough funding, because it's just a huge expense. And so 6 sites is what we think we can afford, and so we have made a more sensitive outcome as the primary outcome, and we will still look at the proportion of patients who get persistent treatment.
But if you
it's a really good question.
If you double the percentage of patients on who have opioid use disorder on the one side and not on the other, how does the
way I look at it, it's different than an efficacy trial. So I look at it that we're measuring both access and persistence. And so the fact that we're doubling the people coming in with an opiate use disorder, that's an outcome. That becomes an outcome that those people came in seeking treatment and got hopefully persistent treatment. So it's a different type of, it answers a different question slightly. But okay. Your point is well taken. It's a quasi-experimental design if you want to use the most, but I think it's a very rigorous design because that's what we want to do. We want to have the people come in who wouldn't have been there. So I actually think it's getting at the important question. There are many of us that actually felt better measuring that because it does measure both access and quality.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And I agree with you that it's a very important outcome.
This is Lisa. Can folks hear me? I think I got dropped there for a minute. Can folks hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I'm not sure. I was talking away that I'm not sure what you all heard or didn't hear, but I just wanted to mention. I'm perhaps you heard this, but I was wondering if folks had any thoughts about methods or strategies we could use to try to incentivize partnerships between the states and the grantees that are rolling out new initiatives or expanded treatment initiatives across the country and linkage to the national NIDA clinical trials network infrastructure. If there might be a way to sort of seed that or to encourage that with funding opportunities, with new partnerships we could conceive of. And I'm not sure, I'm sorry if you heard that before. Somehow I got disconnected, but hopefully that won't happen again. So any thoughts about process or methods around linking these kinds of things?
I think that, Lisa, this is Kathy, and I'll just say I think that if the time frame wants to be speedy, that the option relates to finding those states with statewide databases both for hospitalization and for ER care and prescription monitoring of all opioids, which will include buprenorphine, and to use those existing data sets to evaluate the outcomes in those states. Those data sets tend to be pretty hard to get access to so that the states have access to them, and if they had more resources, they might actually get them talking to each other because they're often in different silos. But I think that's where I would start, would be a survey of states and the databases that currently exist to do health services research, and then building on that infrastructure, because otherwise to build the infrastructure is going to take a long time.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Kathy. Are there other thoughts from others on the call?
I will say those databases, I think, are increasingly common. We have all 3 here in Washington State, although they're not linked and they're not easily available to researchers. They are available to researchers who partner with the state.
Can you say a little bit more about where things stand with the initiatives under CARA, the Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act, and it sounds like a lot of activities already launched or launching, and sort of what's the expectation at the sequencing of things? I ask that as we think about sort of the goal of this meeting today. It would be helpful to know a little bit about the landscape of where that is across the nation.
So, as you probably know, there was no new funding attached to CARA, right? So, and the other thing is that there weren't really new initiatives in it either. They were basically authorized things that we're already doing. The couple things that are new or different are the NPPA's ability to prescribe buprenorphine. And where that is in process is we're working with the Secretary's office on an implementation mechanism, but we really hope to be able to start waivering NPs and PAs for at least 30 patient waiver starting at the beginning of the year. But that's, the Secretary has not okayed that yet. But that's, anyway, it's in process, and something should be decided very soon. And the other thing that's actually new is that if there's a phrase that in the language in CARA that if there is new funding, that we will be able to, so we have these PPW program, the Pregnant Parenting Women's Program, which is a residential treatment services program now, and it's required to be residential, and CARA actually allows us to work with states to develop systems of care that are not residential in nature for pregnant and parenting women and their families, but only if there's new money added, which there hasn't been yet. And then everything else that's in there, at least for us, is stuff we're already doing. So there's potential funding for what we call the MAP-PDOA grants, which are the grants, the 22 grants to states that I mentioned. So there's potentially, there may be more funding for that. And that's that money that's going to the states, and the purpose of the funding is to have them increase access to medication, and it's all 3 medications, not just buprenorphine. And so both addressing the sort of systemic level barriers to access, and then also using some of the funds to actually purchase medication or purchase services. And so from a treatment perspective, that's really what's in CARA. The President's budget had proposed $1 billion, 500,000 about per year for treatment, but there's not much talk about that anymore. So that's where things are. We're currently implementing. We're using what knowledge there is out there about what works and what doesn't. But that is where I think, it might be. When we have talked with ASBE, which is another HHS division, about an evaluation of the MAP-PDOA grant program. It'd be great to work with NIDA to think about how we could do something that's a little bit above and beyond evaluation, in terms of looking at what's happening out in the field as we use these funds. So anyway, that's what's happening, and I really do. I would welcome more opportunities to have this dialogue about how do we work together to ensure that the science is being deployed.
That's great. Thanks, Kim. Are there comments on that from folks on the call? Questions on that? Yeah, I think these are big issues and complex issues, and I think that the most important sort of activities for us, for folks who are interested in this, is to continue this dialogue, to have this ongoing dialogue about research, about needs in our communities and ways that we can coordinate efforts. I think what would be such a shame is if all of the funding to states and communities to expand treatment happens, and right in the backyard of all of these initiatives are, are all these terrific, networks of researchers and healthcare systems involved in research nationally, and not having a conversation between the two, because I think it's a missed opportunity that could actually have a big impact. And so I think the key for us is to, and I know we're low on time here, so maybe what we should think about is sort of as next steps is continue the dialogue about research, and then also think about ideas for some of these challenges and ways that we could think about initiatives that could be to help us move forward so that we have some efficiency and sort of increased impact from our combined activities. So next month, we don't have the date yet, but there'll be a email sent out. There's another one of these webinars with the theme of adolescence and sort of the state of the science of research in adolescent substance abuse treatment. And then in December, we have a similarly organized webinar on the theme of pregnant and parenting mothers. And these are just the 3 that have been lined up so far, but we really hope and envision that this could be an ongoing discussion. And we're really so excited about the large turnout on this call and hopeful that people will remain engaged and that this can be a really productive discussion. And if there are thoughts or comments or feedback from anyone on this call that you want to share, it'd be great to hear from folks between now and the next call, so we can really we can structure this in a way that's most productive. So why don't we end there? And I just want to thank again our speakers, Kim and Betty and Kathy. Thank you so much for preparing these presentations, and thanks to everyone for joining today. Take care.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.